Well, for more, we're joined here in the studio by France 24's Douglas Herbert.
Evening.
And in Algiers by freelance reporter Lamia Achoiche, who's been following those protests from the get-go. Thank you for speaking with us on France 24.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, what's your reaction to this endorsement by the war veterans for the movement?
Well, it's been surprising. I don't think many people saw that coming. But then again, in the last couple of days, we've seen rising support for this protest movement, much to the surprise of the Algerian people, from some official institutions in Algeria. You mentioned the war veterans organization that supported the movement, which the war veterans organization is known for notoriously backing the president and the ruling party, the FLN party. And so we are seeing that the current regime is slowly losing its supporters that have historically supported it.
Lamia, are you still in, I guess you could say, a cautious mode? Because there's been all those warnings over the years. Don't protest, don't demonstrate, otherwise we'll return to the bad old days of the bloody civil war of the 1990s and early 2000s.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Exactly. This has been the rhetoric pushed forward by the regime and the government ever since the rise of the so-called Arab Spring. I don't want to call it spring. I don't like this term because it definitely wasn't a spring. But definitely this has been the talking point of the current government. It's making people fear Algeria going back to its bloody decade. The civil war, as many people know, claimed so many lives, and it's been such a dark period of Algeria's history. And so Algeria did not go through with the Arab Spring, did not follow through with the protests, although we've seen some small protests, but they were shut down so quickly because of this talking point. But now the geopolitical situation is completely different. It's 2019, people are more politically aware, and the atmosphere for change, I'd say it's very positive, and so people are no longer afraid. And one point that I wanna talk about is that most people leading, or let's not say leading, most people taken to the streets are millennials. These millennials have not lived the civil war. They have not seen the carnage and the bloodbaths that the previous generations have seen, and so they're not as easily tricked by this fear tactic by the current regime.
All right, I'm going to turn to Douglas Herbert now to talk a little bit about what's going on this side of the Mediterranean. We heard from the French foreign minister at the National Assembly.
Yeah, the French foreign minister. France has been taking, it's in a very delicate situation. You might even say it's between a rock and a hard place, given its history with Algeria, to put it mildly. What they're trying to do is they are expressing support, obviously, for the Algerian people to choose their leaders. They're expressing support for elections to be held under good conditions. But, that's really diplomatic speak. And when it comes down to it, it's rather bland language. And what it is France really very publicly and very conspicuously, Francois, taking a very standoffish approach. It's not throwing its full weight behind the regime of Bouteflika, but by the same token, it is not throwing its lot behind the protesters. It's simply saying that it supports democratic aspirations and the right of the Algerians to choose their own leaders. That is pretty bland in diplomatic terms.
Let's listen to the foreign minister, Jean-Yves Le Drian, speaking to Parliament earlier.
D'abord, l'Algérie est un pays souverain.
Algeria is a sovereign country.
Et à lui seul qu'il revient de choisir.
And it's up to Algerians to decide its leader and its future.
Ses aspirations.
Doug, when you know the symbiotic history between Algeria and the former colonial power, could he really say anything other than that?
No, there are a lot of people who will say that France, like I said, is stuck in a very difficult position, that France essentially, Francois, is damned if you do and damned if you don't. Support the regime, it's damned. Support the protesters, it will have its critics. It will be a backlash either way. The thing with France is, and this is where you could sort of called the hypocrisy card. Look at what's going on in Venezuela right now. You have all the protesters there, obviously, different countries, far different situations, but the aspirations of the people in the street are essentially the same. They're asking the same things. They believe that they have leaders who are not representing their interests, who are actually destroying impoverishing their countries and asking for some sort of change, a change of leadership, a regime change, so to speak. In one case, the West has thrown, a lot of the West, including the US, including the European Union, has really thrown its support behind that idea of giving that opposition leader a way into power and having those free elections, have been very vocal about it. In this case, and this is the word we keep hearing it time and again, in the name of stability, and we heard it again today and invoked here in France, in the name of this sort of stability, whatever that really means. We've heard this in Egypt in the past. And what do they mean? France means Algeria has been a very key ally in fighting terrorism, a key ally by inference in also holding back a potential influx of migrants from the Sahel region of Africa, something that is obviously a big issue in Europe. In the name of ensuring some sort of warding off turmoil, ensuring stability, keeping that ally on side, it's trying to play a very, very delicate hand right here.
All right, Lamia Achoiche, the difference, though, between a Venezuela and an Algeria seems to me that there's, in the case of Algeria, the protesters, at least at the outset, weren't calling for wholesale regime change. They were simply saying no to a fifth mandate for its ailing president.
That's a very interesting question, because I would say that's not the case. Obviously, the slogans held during the protests are overwhelmingly saying no to the fifth mandate, but that entails a total rejection of the regime, because political observers that follow the political situation in Algeria know that President Bouteflika is not the one calling the shots. It's the people around him. It's the whole system. It's the whole regime who's been in power since 1962, since Algeria's independence from France. And so when we talk about the president, we talk about the people backing him, which is the entire regime. And that's why people are saying it's not enough for Bouteflika not to run for the fifth term, because at this point, it's very easy for the regime to present another candidate who's regime backed, but who's not necessarily openly backing the regime or the ruling party, which is the FLN party, the National Liberation Front. And so although people are calling for the president not to run for the fifth term, they're calling for deeper reforms and the elimination of the entire regime. So we're talking about ministers, we're talking about people holding key positions in key national institutions, key national companies. Let's mention Sonatrach, the national oil and gas company, the country's entire riches are basically in the hand of this company, and it's nationally owned. And so the people running this company need to go also for the national wealth, the riches of the country to be equally distributed and for the people to benefit from them. A lot of Algerians compare Algeria to Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. We have the same national resources in terms of oil and gas, but look at where Dubai is right now. Look at where Abu Dhabi is right now. And look at Algeria. We're light years behind. And so the entire regime needs to change for this revolution to be successful.
So, Lamia, the words of the French foreign minister that you heard a short while ago, could he have said something different, or because of France's relationship with Algeria, that's as far as he can go?
Definitely, that's as far as he can go. Algeria and France have a very love-hate relationship. It's very even hard to explain it. And I totally agree with your guest, what he said before. They're damned either way. Whether they back the revolution, they're damned. Whether they don't, they're damned. But what I can say is reporting for the entire people, the country, the sentiment here is that we don't want France to get involved. I don't think any Algerian right now wants France to back back them or not back them. We just want them to stay out of it. And so, yeah, I agree. The statement of the foreign minister is deeply diplomatic. It's completely diplomatic. I don't think they really know where to go right now, because historically we all know that France completely backs the Algerian regime. And so I think they did not expect the popular uprising to be this important and this widespread, and they really don't know what to do. And so I don't believe that the French government is really backing the revolution.
Lamia, the next big date is coming up Friday. They've been asking for big demonstrations then. What more do we know about what's going to happen on Friday?
Yes. Well, Friday coincides with March the 8th, which is the International Women's Day. And so there's going to be a huge feminine presence during the protests. We're expecting to see more women than men, I think, this Friday. But also, we're expecting to see more people from all walks of life, from all ages, all sexes, all affiliations. And so I think we're expecting millions of Algerians to take to the streets this Friday. And my personal analysis is that it's going to get wider and bigger and more popular each week unless we see a real change. And as I said before, it's not enough that the president does not run for a fifth term. We want more, deeper reforms. And so we want everybody to go, speaking on behalf of the people, obviously. And so, yeah, I think this Friday it's going to be interesting, is that we're going to see more women in the streets, and we're going to see that women really have their place in the Algerian society. Contrary to what many people think, Algeria is a Muslim country, a conservative country, but also a country that cherishes its women. And so I personally can't wait to see the outcome this Friday.
We have breaking news. Two branches of the powerful Algerian labor union, the UGTA, say that they too oppose the plan by Abdelaziz Bouteflika to seek a fifth term.
Yeah, we're seeing, look, we're calling them cracks in the edifice, and those cracks in the edifice, so to speak, of the system seem to be getting a little wider by the day. And the question is, despite all of those, the comments by the Army Chief General talking about vowing to guarantee, quote, security and stability in the country, the question is really, can they hold the fort? And is this going to intensify, as we just heard Lamia talking about? If it does, if millions actually take the streets this Friday, what does that bode for the regime's ability, for the system's ability, if you will, to maintain itself in power? I'll just note that the lawyers, two separate lawyers associations, one in the capital, they have thrown their weight behind basically the protesters, saying that they will represent, defend free of charge anyone who is arrested in these protests, who's protesting against a fifth term for Bouteflika. And we have a separate lawyers organization, François, also raising questions to the Constitutional Council about the physical fitness of a candidate to serve. And this brings into question, because let's remind our viewers that as we speak right now, Abdelaziz Bouteflika is in a hospital in Geneva officially for routine medical tests. But there are no regular updates and no transparency about his actual health, leading to all manner of speculation about just how, if at all, fit he is to serve in the nation's supreme post.
Douglas Herbert, many thanks. I want to thank Lamia Achoiche for joining us from Algiers.
Thank you for having me.